My son secretly dropped out of medical school and spent my money partying. Now he is demanding that I help him again? My son called me crying and said medical school would remove him from clinical placement unless I paid an $18,600 fee by noon. I had already spent more than $96,000 supporting him through a program he had supposedly dreamed about since childhood. I nearly transferred the money without asking questions. Then the school bursar told me the invoice was fake. My son, Evan, had withdrawn 11 months earlier. During those 11 months, he sent me photographs from old lecture halls, invented exams, and asked for rent near a campus where he no longer lived. Bank records later showed bottle service charges, luxury rentals, weekend flights, and payments to an event company he secretly owned. When I froze the education account, Evan accused me of stealing his future. 6 months later, he returned with $47,000 in debt and demanded another rescue. He said refusing would prove I cared more about money than my only child. What Evan did not know was that I had spent those 6 months documenting every lie, locating the remaining funds, and deciding exactly what help I would offer. It was not the help he expected. My name is Carla. I was 54 when I learned my son had not been a medical student for almost a year. Evan is my only child. His father, Marcus, died from pancreatic cancer when Evan was 14. Before Marcus became ill, he worked as a pharmacist and loved explaining how medicine could turn chemistry into relief. Evan worshipped him. During Marcus's final months, Evan spent hours beside the hospital bed doing homework. One afternoon, he told his father he would become a doctor and find diseases earlier so families would have more time. Marcus told him, "Become whatever kind of man lets you sleep honestly at night." For years, our family remembered only the doctor part. After Marcus died, I returned to full-time work as a municipal contracts manager. I was not wealthy, but I had a stable salary, life insurance proceeds, and a house with a manageable mortgage. I placed $140,000 of the insurance money into an education investment account for Evan. I added to it every month. By the time he entered college, the balance was just under $203,000. Evan earned scholarships for most of his undergraduate tuition. He studied biology, volunteered at a hospital, and scored well on the medical admissions test. When he was accepted to Lakeshore College of Medicine at 24, I cried harder than he did. At the white coat ceremony, Evan held a photograph of Marcus inside his jacket. He told me his father had finally seen the promise kept. That image made me vulnerable to every lie that followed. The education account was in my name with Evan listed as beneficiary. It was intended for qualified expenses, but the arrangement did not prevent me from withdrawing money for other purposes with tax consequences. I controlled distributions. During his first semester, tuition went directly to Lakeshore. I transferred $2,800 each month for rent, food, transportation, and basic expenses. Evan lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with another student named Noah. Medical school was harder than he expected. He called after anatomy exams, sounding exhausted. He said everyone around him seemed smarter and more disciplined. I encouraged counseling and reminded him that changing careers would not betray his father. Evan became angry whenever I mentioned leaving. He said, "Dad died believing I would do this. I am not quitting because the first year is uncomfortable." I mistook rigidity for commitment. At the end of the first semester, Evan failed one course and had to remediate it. He told me immediately. We met with an academic advisor by video because Evan had previously signed a release allowing me to participate in financial and support discussions. The advisor explained that one failed course did not end a medical career. Evan passed the remediation exam. During the second semester, he stopped sharing details. He said the school discouraged students from involving parents and that he needed to become independent. That sounded reasonable. I did not want to become a mother who treated an adult son like a child. The first fabricated expense arrived in March. Evan emailed a PDF showing a $4,900 simulation laboratory assessment. The document used the school logo and included his student number. I transferred the amount from the education account to a bank account he said the school used for auxiliary fees. The account name displayed as LCM Services. I did not notice that it was an ordinary business account rather than a school payment portal. 2 months later, he requested $6,200 for summer clinical preparation. Then he needed $3,700 for board exam registration and review materials. Each request included an invoice. Each amount seemed plausible to someone who knew medical education was expensive but did not know the exact fee structure. Evan also said Noah had moved out and his rent increased. I raised the monthly transfer to $3,600. I asked why he could not move into a smaller apartment. Evan said the building was close enough to walk after late laboratory sessions. He reminded me that safety mattered. I paid. The lies were not only financial. Evan created an entire school year for me. He called before invented exams. He described a difficult standardized patient who refused to answer questions. He complained about a professor who changed lecture slides after midnight. He even scheduled a video call on the morning he claimed to begin second-year orientation. Evan wore scrubs and sat in front of a white wall. A printed Lakeshore emblem was taped behind him. I noticed the paper curling at one corner and asked whether the school had temporary signs during construction. Evan laughed and said administrators spent tuition on consultants but could not mount a logo properly. The joke convinced me because it contained the ordinary irritation of student life. Months later, bank records placed him in a short-term rental across town that morning. The white wall belonged to the rental kitchen. He had printed the emblem at an office supply store 20 minutes before our call. That detail hurt more than several expensive charges. It showed preparation. He was not answering a question badly in a moment of fear. He was designing evidence for me. When I asked for photographs, he sent images in scrubs outside the medical library. I later learned he took 20 photographs during one visit and released them gradually. He canceled visits home because he claimed he was studying. In reality, he was traveling to Miami, Nashville, and Las Vegas with people I had never met. His social media did not expose him because he blocked me and most relatives from a second account. On the account I could see, he posted coffee, textbooks, and motivational quotes. I felt proud of his discipline. There were warnings. At Thanksgiving, Evan arrived with a watch that cost more than my first car. He said a classmate had sold it cheaply after receiving a newer model. At Christmas, he gave me a designer handbag. I asked how he could afford it. He said he had earned money tutoring undergraduates. I told him to save his income. He kissed my cheek and said he wanted me to own something beautiful after sacrificing so much. The gift was purchased with money I had transferred for a fake exam fee. In January, I received a tax form showing only one semester of tuition for the previous calendar year. Evan explained that Lakeshore had changed payment processors and the second form would arrive separately. I should have called the school. Instead, I placed the document in my tax folder and accepted his explanation. My closest friend, Denise, questioned him more directly. Denise was a nurse practitioner and had known Evan since birth. During dinner, she asked which hospital hosted his upcoming clinical rotations. Evan named St. Anne's. Denise said Lakeshore students usually rotated at County General during that term. Evan replied that St. Anne's had created a new partnership for high-performing students. After he left, Denise told me the answers sounded wrong. I defended him. I said medical programs changed constantly and accused her of resenting the pride I took in his success. Denise did not argue. She said, "I hope I am wrong, but hope is not verification." I apologized to her later. At the time, I needed Evan's story to remain true because it held both his future and part of Marcus's memory. The $18,600 request arrived on a Tuesday in April. Evan called at 8:17 a.m. He sounded panicked. He said Lakeshore had discovered an unpaid clinical placement fee from the previous term. Unless the balance cleared by noon, the school would remove him from rotations and delay graduation by a year. He emailed an invoice while we spoke. I opened the education account. The remaining balance was $81,400. I had believed more than $120,000 remained, but repeated distributions and market changes had reduced it faster than I realized. I told Evan I would call the bursar and pay directly. He shouted, "There is no time for that. The portal takes 3 days. Send it to me and I will wire it through the student office. His urgency finally sounded like pressure rather than crisis. I said I would not transfer another dollar without speaking to the school. Evan began crying. He said he could not survive another delay and asked whether I wanted him to end up like his father. Marcus had died from cancer. He had not failed because someone refused a wire transfer. Using his death that way broke the spell. I called the bursar number listed on the school's official website, not the number printed on Evan's invoice. Because Evan's original information release remained on file, the representative could discuss his financial account after verifying my identity. She found no clinical placement fee. She asked me to send the invoice to the fraud office. 20 minutes later, a school administrator called. She said Lakeshore had not issued the document and did not use the bank details shown. Then she told me Evan had voluntarily withdrawn 11 months earlier, after the first month of his second year. He was not on leave. He was not completing rotations. He was not eligible to receive school invoices. I asked whether there had been a mistake. The administrator read the withdrawal date again. I sat at my desk until the numbers on my computer blurred. Evan called 12 times while I spoke with the school. I did not answer. I contacted the education account provider and suspended all distributions. Then I called an attorney because several invoices appeared to use a protected school logo and false banking information. Only after those steps did I call my son. I asked Evan, "When did you leave Lakeshore?" He was silent. Then he said the school had forced him out temporarily because professors targeted him after the remediation exam. I told him I had the official withdrawal date. Evan changed the story. He said he had suffered depression, felt unable to tell me, and planned to return after recovering. I asked where the tuition and fee money had gone. He said living expenses continued even during leave. I read the fake invoice number aloud. Evan hung up. I drove to his apartment that afternoon with Denise. I did not trust myself to go alone. The building manager said Evan had moved out 8 months earlier. He had received his security deposit after leaving the unit clean. The address linked to LCM services led to a mailbox store. That evening, Denise found Evan's hidden social media account through a public photograph where someone tagged him. The page belonged to a party promotion brand called White Line Social. Evan appeared in dozens of posts wearing the expensive watch. He stood behind velvet ropes, held champagne bottles, and advertised weekend events in rooftop bars. One caption called him Dr. E, the future surgeon bringing medical school energy to nightlife. White Line Social had been formed 9 months earlier by Evan and a man named Troy Maddox. Its initials did not match LCM services, but later records showed both accounts used the same mailbox. I did not confront him online. I saved every public post and gave copies to my attorney. Evan arrived at my house 2 days later. He looked exhausted but not ashamed. He said I had invaded his privacy and endangered a business that was finally becoming profitable. I asked how fake medical school invoices became business capital. Evan said the education account had always been intended for his future. He believed entrepreneurship was education and that Marcus would have supported him. I told him Marcus would not have supported fraud. Evan shouted that I had built a shrine around his father and forced him into medicine before he understood what he wanted. That accusation contained truth. I had praised the doctor dream too loudly. I had introduced Evan as a future physician from the time he was 15. I had treated every achievement as proof that tragedy could produce purpose. I apologized for that pressure. Then I told him pressure did not create 11 months of invoices, staged photographs, and stolen education funds. Evan said, "You cannot steal money that was saved for you." I explained that the account belonged to me, and distributions were conditioned on legitimate education expenses. More importantly, he had lied to obtain them. He demanded access to the remaining $81,400 as compensation for the career expectations I imposed. I refused. Evan told me I was no longer his mother and left. The next month revealed how far the deception extended. My attorney subpoenaed bank records after we filed a civil claim to preserve funds. About $96,000 had been transferred after Evan withdrew. Roughly $31,000 covered ordinary living costs. More than $22,000 funded White Line events, including venue deposits, performers, and promotional videos. Another $18,000 paid for travel, luxury car rentals, expensive meals, and bottle service. The rest went to cash withdrawals, gifts, and credit card payments. Troy had convinced Evan that appearing wealthy was necessary to attract wealthy customers. Evan was not only partying, he was purchasing the image of a successful promoter with money he obtained by pretending to study medicine. The business had revenue, but almost no profit. Each sold-out event financed the next one. Venues required larger deposits. Troy controlled the customer payment platform while Evan signed contracts. White Line also offered discounted admission to medical and nursing students. Evan used his old Lakeshore identification to persuade organizers that the company had a formal connection to the school. There was no partnership, but the implication attracted sponsors. A vitamin company provided free products after Evan described himself as a medical student and co-founder of a physician-led social network. The sponsor did not lose much money, but it demanded that White Line remove the claim. Evan told me later that this was the moment he first understood how many separate lies had to remain active for the business to survive. He did not stop then. He created the $18,600 invoice instead. The first major twist arrived when a venue attorney contacted me. Evan had listed me as a financial reference on a $47,000 event contract. He had not forged my signature, but he told the venue I administered his family trust and would cover emergency obligations. The contract remained in Evan's name. I was not legally responsible. The venue contacted me only because Troy had disappeared with ticket revenue and Evan claimed family funds would resolve the shortage. Evan had demanded the $18,600 because the venue required exactly that amount to avoid canceling a holiday weekend event. The clinical placement fee was a cover story. When I refused, the event collapsed. Customers received chargebacks, vendors demanded payment, and White Line lost the little credibility it possessed. Evan blamed me publicly. He posted that an abusive parent had seized his inheritance after he rejected a career chosen for him. I did not respond online. My attorney sent a short notice stating that no inheritance had been seized and directing financial claims through counsel. Several relatives called me cruel. They had seen only the story of a grieving son who changed careers and a controlling mother who withheld his father's money. I invited them to review the fake invoices privately if they wanted to judge. Most declined. It was easier to offer an opinion than examine evidence. Denise and my sister Paula stood beside me. Paula admitted Evan had borrowed $4,000 from her for a supposed board exam course. He repaid only $500. Another family friend had given him $2,300 for medical equipment. The deception had expanded whenever my transfers were not enough. I could have pursued criminal charges aggressively. The school retained the option to report misuse of its logo, and my attorney explained that the fabricated invoices could support fraud allegations. I chose a civil settlement first. Evan agreed to acknowledge the false documents, surrender his interest in the remaining White Line assets, and repay $38,000 over time. That amount did not cover everything, but it reflected recoverable business expenditures rather than ordinary support I might have provided if he had told the truth. In exchange, I agreed not to initiate a separate police complaint unless he violated the settlement or created new false documents. The school made its own decision and issued a formal cease and desist rather than pursuing charges. I did not make that agreement because I believed consequences would ruin his life. I made it because restitution, treatment, and enforceable limits offered a better chance of repair than an unpredictable criminal case. My attorney warned me not to confuse mercy with informality. Every term was written. Evan had independent counsel. The settlement stated that no payment purchased forgiveness, and no family relationship canceled the debt. Signing it was the first time Evan had to read his actions without the language of pressure, grief, or entrepreneurial risk around them. Evan signed because he believed Troy would return with the ticket revenue. Troy did not return. For 6 months, I heard almost nothing from my son. He moved between friends' apartments and worked briefly for a nightlife company. His wages were inconsistent, and he missed the first 2 settlement payments. I continued therapy. I examined my role without accepting responsibility for his choices. I had encouraged one identity too strongly. I had also ignored warning signs because the medical school story made Marcus's death feel less meaningless. Evan learned that invoking his father could stop my questions. That realization was painful, but it gave me a boundary stronger than anger. The remaining education account stayed frozen while my attorney clarified tax consequences. I later changed the beneficiary to myself for professional training and retirement-related courses. I did not owe Evan the balance simply because I once imagined it funding his degree. He returned in November. Evan appeared at my door with one suitcase. He had lost his apartment, Troy was still missing, and creditors were calling. He owed approximately $47,000 across business contracts, credit cards, and personal loans. He asked me for $52,000 to clear the debts and restart his life. I told him I would not give him cash. Evan said, "Then what kind of help are you offering?" I had prepared the answer with my therapist and attorney. I offered him a room in my house for 90 days. I would pay directly for a mental health evaluation, counseling, and an appointment with a nonprofit debt advisor. He would obtain full-time work outside nightlife, follow a written household agreement, make settlement payments, and disclose every debt to the advisor. I would provide groceries and a bus pass. I would not pay creditors, invest in a business, or transfer the education account. Evan called the conditions humiliating. He said a mother should help without turning love into a contract. I told him, "Unstructured help is how I financed your lies for 11 months." He said he would rather sleep in his car. I answered that the room remained available under the same conditions. He left. For 2 nights, he did sleep in a borrowed car. On the 3rd morning, he returned and accepted the agreement. The first weeks were ugly. Evan missed an intake appointment, came home after the agreed time, and accused me of monitoring him. I enforced the consequence we had written. The 90-day period did not extend when he ignored requirements. He eventually began working at a medical supply warehouse. The job embarrassed him at first because former classmates sometimes visited the loading dock. His therapist helped him separate shame about leaving medical school from responsibility for what he did afterward. Dropping out was not the betrayal. The year of deception was. One former classmate, Noah, recognized him at the warehouse. Evan expected ridicule. Instead, Noah said several students from their original class had changed programs or taken leave. Noah also revealed that he had contacted Evan repeatedly after the withdrawal. Evan ignored him because Noah knew there was nothing shameful about leaving and therefore threatened the excuse that shame made honesty impossible. Evan later apologized to Noah for using his name in stories about their apartment and studies. Noah accepted the apology but declined to rebuild the friendship. That consequence taught Evan something money could not repair. Accountability does not guarantee restoration. It only makes restoration possible where the injured person still wants it. That distinction changed our conversations. Evan later admitted he had withdrawn after panic attacks and academic probation. He feared telling me, but he also enjoyed the attention and status that White Line provided. The party business did not simply distract him from failure. It gave him a new audience that still called him doctor. He sold the watch and several electronics. The designer handbag he gave me could not be returned, so I sold it and credited the money toward Paula's unpaid loan. After 90 days, Evan rented a room with a warehouse coworker. He continues counseling and makes small monthly payments. He has not asked to return to medical school. He is taking one evening course in supply chain management and paying for it himself. Our relationship is limited but real. I no longer introduce him by his achievements, and he no longer has access to my accounts. Some relatives say the written agreement was too cold. They believe I should have paid the creditors and allowed him to begin again without the weight of debt. I believe beginning again without consequences would have taught him that a convincing emergency could still convert my fear into money. I did help my son. I gave him shelter, treatment, transportation, food, and a path towards stability. I refused to purchase another version of the future he was selling. Marcus's photograph still sits on my desk. I remember his actual, final advice now, not only the promise Evan made beside his bed: become whatever kind of man lets you sleep honestly at night. Evan is not there yet. At least he is finally awake. So, was I wrong to refuse the $52,000 rescue after my son secretly left medical school and spent nearly a year lying to obtain my money? Or was offering direct support with strict conditions the only kind of help that would not finance the same pattern again?